In this class, you will learn how to use the past simple tense. This is one of the most exciting and important tenses in our series of English verb tenses. Why? Because we use this tense so often to talk about all kinds of things. For example, you can use this tense to tell someone what you did yesterday. You can also use this tense to tell somebody what happened in the world 500 years ago. So whatever you're trying to describe that happened before now, you can use the past simple tense. So, are you with me? Are you ready to learn this tense? Let's get started. So, you see here on the board, I've shown a timeline. Here we see now, okay? And everything before now is in the past. So when we talk about the past simple tense, we're talking about a time that is before now or in the past. But past simple specifically talks about something that happened in the past and it's finished and it's over, okay? We can talk about an action or an event or a situation that started and ended in the past, okay? And that's shown here by these little X's. These things happened before, okay? So now let's look at a little sample of what this tense sounds like when we actually use it with a basic verb, the verb to work. So in some ways, this is so easy because when we use the past simple tense with all of these different subjects, right? You just have to learn one word. So for example, if our base verb is to work, in the past, we just say worked. What did we do? We added ed. So say it after me. I worked. You worked. We worked. They worked. He worked. She worked. And it worked. That's it. You just used the past simple tense. Good for you. Now let's look at when we use the past simple tense. Okay? So we can use it with a time expression or without a time expression. What do I mean by that? Let's see. Brian called last week. So when we say last week, right, that's a time expression. It's a word that tells us about time, like yesterday, last month, last year, okay, 5 years ago. These are all time expressions. So of course, you can use a time expression with the past tense. What's the past tense here? This word, called. But you could also use the past simple tense without a time expression. So you could simply say, I cooked dinner, okay? And as soon as I use this word, cooked, we know that we're talking about the past. Next, we can use the past simple tense to talk about the recent past or the distant past. What do I mean by that? The recent past means something that just happened a short time ago. And the distant past means something that happened a long time ago. Let's look at some examples. We visited her yesterday. Okay, yesterday is not very long ago, so we could use it with the past simple. We could also use the past simple to talk about something that happened way back. She lived in London a long time ago. All right? So it doesn't matter. We can use it in all these cases. Next, we can use one verb or we can use many verbs in the sentence. It doesn't matter. Usually they will all be in the past simple. For example, we can use it for one action. She talked to her manager, right? What's the verb here? Talked. Or we can use it for many actions in one sentence even. They invited their friends, ordered pizza, and watched the game. Okay? So here we have 3 verbs. Doesn't matter. You can have as many verbs as you need to, and it's not a problem. Most of the time, once you start in the past simple, you're going to stay in that tense though, okay? And here we have the other verbs in our examples. So these are the main situations in which you can use freely and easily the past simple tense. Now let's look at how we form the past simple tense. So the first thing you have to remember when you're working with this tense is that in English there are two kinds of verbs: regular verbs and irregular verbs. How do we know which is which? Well, it's kind of a little tricky, but the regular verbs are the ones that in the past tense, they just have ed or d. They end like that. For example, work becomes worked. Clean becomes cleaned. Watch becomes watched, right? So in all those cases, we see that there is a ed. This is the most common ending. We will see later there are a few other ways that we can do it, but usually we add ed. But in the irregular verbs, that doesn't happen. We don't have a past tense form which has ed. In the irregular cases, sometimes the verb changes a little bit and sometimes it changes completely. You probably already have heard many of these words though, so you probably do know them. So let's look at the verb go. In the past, it becomes went. Completely different. See becomes saw. I see today, I saw yesterday. Buy becomes bought. So those are just some examples of the irregular ones, okay? There are many more, and we're going to look at exactly how that works a little bit later. But for now, let's start with the regular verbs, okay? And I'll show you exactly what to do and how to use them in a positive sentence, in a negative sentence, and in a question. So, we already looked a little bit at the positive or affirmative sentence, and we saw that all we do is we take the base form of our verb. So let's say our base verb here is the verb to work, right? This is the base form before we make any changes to it. So when we put it into the past simple tense, in this case, it's a regular verb. So we just add ed, and we can use that same verb for all of the subjects, right? You remember that from the beginning? I worked, you worked, we worked, they worked, he worked, she worked, it worked. You don't have to change it. This is a lot easier actually in English than in many other languages, where there are different forms for every subject. So sometimes English is actually easier and might be easier than many other languages, okay? So that's for the positive sentence. Now let's look at what happens when we make it negative, make a negative sentence. So then we say, I didn't work. So what happens here? Here you have to use a helping verb, which is the verb do in the past, did, and negative, didn't. Didn't is the short form that we usually use in conversation. We say, I didn't work. But what does it stand for? Didn't is actually a short form or contraction of two words, did not. So you could say, we did not work. But usually, if we're just speaking in regular conversation, we just say, we didn't work. Say it after me. We didn't work. It's a little bit tricky to get it out of your mouth, but if you practice it, you'll get it. All right? Next, what happens when we ask a question? We have to use that same helping verb again. This time, the order changes though. Okay, so we put did first. Did I work? Did you work? Did we work? Did they work? Did he work? Did she work? Did it work? Okay, now, did you realize something? Here, we had to change the verb, right? In the positive sentence, the verb changed. We added that ed and we said, they worked. But here, what happened? We came back to the base form of the verb, right? We just said they didn't work. And what happened with the question? We came back to the base form of the verb. We said, did they work? So the only place where you really need to change the verb at all, the regular verb, is here in a positive or affirmative sentence. Okay? Now, remember that when you're asking questions, first of all, this is just like a regular question, right? Did they work yesterday, for example? You could also ask what's called a negative question. You could say something like, didn't they work yesterday? I thought so. Didn't you work yesterday? Okay, it's possible. Okay. Or you could ask a question that begins with one of the question words. What are the question words again? Who, what, when, where, why, how much, how many, right? So then what happens? We put it before this. We have to keep the same structure and we say, where did you work yesterday? When did they work? Why did he work? Okay? So just put the question word, if you have one, before did. But we need the word did to form the question. So this is the entire structure of the past simple tense for regular verbs. Now let's look at some of the spelling changes we need to make when using the past simple tense. So we already talked about the basic one, which is that you take the verb, the base form of the verb, and you add ed. So here we have some examples. Walk and walked. Cook and cooked, right? We just needed to add ed. And that works for lots of the regular verbs. But there are always some exceptions. And here are a few exceptions, okay? Sometimes the verb itself, the base form of the verb, ends with an E already. Then you don't need to add another E. You just add D. So bake and baked. Use, used, right? We just added the D there. Next, if you have a verb that ends with a Y and has a consonant before it, okay? Consonant means anything that's not a vowel. A vowel is A, E, I, O, U, and a consonant is anything else but that vowel, okay? So if you have a word that ends with Y and has a consonant before it, then what you do is you cancel the Y, right? Cancel the Y and add I-E-D, like you see here. Cried. Study, studied. Okay, got that? And then we have one other pattern that you might see very often, and that is when we double the last letter and then add ed. When do we do that? If you look at the base form of the verb from the end, okay, and you see that there is a consonant and a vowel and a consonant, all right, from the end, then we usually double the last letter, as in stop, stopped. Plan, planned. So we doubled the last letter, plus we added the ed. So these are some of the basic ways in which you need to make spelling changes in the past simple tense. But the best way for you to learn it is with these rules, but also by just observing and paying attention every time you're reading English. Pay attention to the spelling so that you can master it. Now let's talk about pronunciation. The pronunciation of past tense regular verbs depends not on the spelling, but on the sound of the base form of the verb at the end. So, if the base form of the verb has a voiced sound, then we pronounce it with a D. What does that mean, voiced sound? It means that when you say it, it has a little bit of vibration. It creates some vibration or movement inside your vocal cords or your throat. Consonants that do that, voiced consonants, are N, G, M, R, V, vowels, and so on. There are more, okay? So when you say these words, words that end with that kind of voiced sound, in the base form of the verb, like learn, right? Charge, or play, call, right? When you have those sounds, then you're going to say them with a D. For example, learned, charged, played, called, loved, seemed. Okay? Now, if the last sound at the base form of the verb is unvoiced, then that means that there's no vibration or almost no vibration. All right? When you say it. Consonants like those are K, S, P, F. Also words that end with a ch sound or sh sound. These are unvoiced. There's very little vibration. So for these kind of words, we have a T or T sound at the end. For example, cooked, hoped, missed, washed, laughed, watched. Okay? Got that? Now, I know it's a little bit hard. Like, how are you going to remember, like, voiced, unvoiced, vibration, no vibration, movement, no movement? So it is technical. If you're very interested in the pronunciation and you want to understand it perfectly, then please study that in detail and you will be able to master it, okay? But otherwise, what you can do for these two columns is to listen carefully, and for all words, listen very carefully to good English teachers, good English speakers, and pay attention to these words, okay? Now, one category that's easier is when the base form of the verb ends with a T or a D sound. That means a T or D sound. For example, want, right? We had the T sound, or need, we had the D sound. In those cases, it's really easy. We just make the ending stronger and we say like a ud sound. For example, wanted, needed, invited, decided, started, ended. Okay? So, those are the basic rules for pronouncing the regular past tense form of verbs. Now let's practice what you've learned. So first, we'll take some sentences that are written in the present simple tense and we'll change them into sentences into the past simple tense. Okay, these are just positive sentences, not negative and not questions. So, number 1, I play tennis. In the past, what does that become? I played. I played tennis, right? Good. Next, they study math. What does that become in the past? They, yes, studied. They studied math. And remember the spelling change because it's a Y here, right? Becomes I-E-D. Good. Now, let's take some sentences which are already in the past, but they're positive sentences, and change them to make them negative sentences. Number 3, it rained becomes what? What do we need? It didn't rain. Remember, we come back to the base form of the verb here after the negative sentence, right? It didn't rain. Number 4, John called. Make it negative. John didn't call. Again, we've come back to the base form of the verb. You've got it. Okay, next, let's do a few questions. All right? Number 5, Alex sent the email. So you want to know if Alex did that. So how would you start that question? You would start with the word did, right? Did Alex send the email? Okay? Did Alex send? Here it was Alex sent, but we're coming back to what? The base form of the verb. Yes. Did Alex send the email? Okay? Very good. And, of course, we had to start with did, that helping verb that we use with questions and with negative sentences. All right. Number 6. They stayed at the hotel. So you want to ask a question now that starts with where. What do you need to say after that? Where did they stay? Right? Because even if you add the question word, you're still going to need to have that did, and then your subject, and then the verb in the base form. Okay, good. Number 7, she arrived at 6 o'clock. Now your question is asking about when. When did she arrive? Okay? Again, we've come back to the base form of the verb. Okay? Very good. So if you've got these right, that means you've understood it. And if you haven't, we're going to practice a little bit more as we go along. Now let's look at how to form the past simple tense with irregular verbs. So once again, what's an irregular verb? That's a verb where the past tense form is quite different or sometimes completely different from the regular base form of the verb. Let's look at an example here. Our base verb is going to be the verb to go. All right? This is our base verb. So, in the past, in a positive sentence, what do we say? I went. Go becomes went. And again, it will be the same for all of the subjects. I went, you went, we went, they went, he went, she went, it went, right? So go becomes went. How do you know that? You just have to learn it. You have to memorize it. You have to remember it, okay? There is no other way, really. Next, when we go to the negative sentence. So, it's the same principle as we learned for the regular verbs. We are going to go back to the base form of the verb. Let's see how it sounds. So, positive, I went. Negative, I didn't go. We've come back, right, to the base form of the verb here. I didn't go. And again, didn't is a contraction or short form for the words did not. But again, in conversation, we're just going to say didn't. So, I didn't go. Question. Again, we need that helping verb did in the negative and in the question. So the question becomes, did you go? Again, we're coming back to that base form of the verb. Okay? So that part is the same. The principle is the same. The way that we form those verbs is the same for regular and irregular. Just with irregular, you have to learn what is that past tense form for the verb. Okay? But otherwise, it's really the same thing. So once you've learned it for regular verbs, you can apply the same rules to work on these verbs. Okay? And remember, the same style works here. So if you need to add a question word, where did you go? When did you go? How did you go? Why did you go? Right? We just put it just here before the did, but we have to keep this order. All right? Now, just to show you that you've got it, let's try with another irregular verb, buy. So buy is the base form of the verb. What does it become in the past? Have you heard it? Every day I buy a newspaper. Yesterday I bought. Okay? So that word, for example, is spelled like this. Bought. I bought a newspaper. Yesterday I didn't buy, right? We're coming back to the base form of the verb. And did you buy? Good. Let's try it with the verb sell. So this is in the regular base form of the verb. The past tense of sell is sold. Okay? So he sold his car. He didn't sell his car. Did he sell his car? Okay? So when you can do that, right? The positive, the negative, and the question, then you can express whatever you need to express in the past continuous tense, the past simple tense, even with irregular verbs. All right? Now let's do some practice with the irregular verbs. Now, I realize that you might not know all the answers here unless you have heard these verbs before, okay? But don't worry, we'll do it together. If you know them, you can help me to fill them out, and otherwise just follow along. All right? So, first we're going to take 3 verbs in the present simple tense, their base form, and we're going to write them in the past tense form. And these are all irregular verbs. So let's take the verb forget, and if we want to put it into the past, what will it become? We something our tickets. We, do you know this word? Forgot our tickets. Okay, so if you don't know it, this is a good time to learn it. Also learn what the word is, learn how to pronounce it, learn how to spell it. Spelling the irregular verbs also is something that you need to learn. There are no 100% rules, but there are patterns for the spelling. And the verbs fall into some groups, and you might see some patterns there for spelling, but otherwise you kind of have to learn them as you go along. All right? So, number 2, sleep. Let's change that into the past. She something early. The past tense of sleep is she slept early. Say it after me. Slept. Good. Teach. He something science. Past tense of teach. Taught. T-A-U-G-H-T. Say it after me. Taught. Good. Now, here we have the past tense form already of these irregular verbs. But what we're going to do is we're going to make this sentence a negative sentence. All right? So, the verb is spoke. Spoke is the past tense of which verb? Speak. Good. So, now how do we make it negative here? They didn't speak Spanish. Okay? They spoke Spanish. They didn't speak Spanish. Remember, we're coming back always to the base form of the verb. Next, this is actually an interesting irregular verb because it doesn't change. The present tense form is hurt. The past tense form is also hurt. And that's why it's an irregular verb, because it doesn't change. But it doesn't change in this particular way. All right? So, hurt, right, becomes, when it's negative, it didn't hurt. Okay, good. The past tense of the verb, knew. Knew is the past tense of which verb? Know. Okay? Know. So, how do we make this a negative sentence? I didn't know you were here. I knew you were here. I didn't know you were here. It hurt. It didn't hurt. They spoke Spanish. They didn't speak Spanish. Okay? You have to feel the rhythm, hear the rhythm, say it aloud lots of times, and it will help you to remember the rules. All right? Next, we're going to make some questions. Number 7, I met your manager at the meeting. The past tense verb here is what? Met, right? I met your manager at the meeting. The question word we're using is where. So what do we say after that? Where did you meet my manager? Okay? Again, question word, but after that, we still have to keep the form for questions with did you meet? Where did you meet? Number 8, she gave John $50. So, what's the verb? Gave. Gave is the past tense of which verb? Give. Good. So, how much did she give John? Okay? So, you see the pattern. You've learned it. You've practiced it. And a little more practice and you'll feel very comfortable making these kind of changes from a positive sentence to a negative sentence or a question, whatever you need to say or write. Next, let's look at how to give short answers with the past simple tense, using both the regular verbs and irregular verbs. Okay? So, let's take the first one. Did Jack finish his report? So if somebody asked you that, as we said before, we don't usually give like a full answer. Yes, Jack finished the report. You just say something short. So you say, for example, yes, he did, if it's a positive answer. And you know to say that because the question starts with did. So we say, yes, he did. And that cannot be shortened. No contraction allowed there. Or, no, he didn't. All right? And again, we get didn't from this did. All right? It's coming from there. So the way that the question is asked is the way you can answer. That will help you. The next question. Did the flight leave on time? Okay. Yes, it did. No contraction possible. Or, no, it didn't. All right? Again, you see that you can use the word from the question to answer the question. All right? And here's the last one for you. And I'm just going to give you one option here. Did you understand the past simple? So I hope you are saying, yes, I did, right? Here we go. We're not even going to talk about the last option because I'm positive that you have learned quite a lot. All right? So this is how we give the short answers in the past simple tense. Now we'll look at some common mistakes that students make when using the past simple tense. And you can help me to correct them. So, sometimes the mistake is that the student is using the wrong tense. For example, these are all mistakes, all right? We're going to correct them together. But first, let's read what's wrong. I give him the laptop yesterday. So, this sentence is about the past because it says yesterday, but the person used a verb in the present tense, give. So how do we correct it? We correct it by changing give to gave. I gave him the laptop yesterday. So you always need to make sure that you're using the right tense. Next, sometimes the verb form is wrong. For example, she righted the report. So let's suppose this is in the past. So, is that a word? not correct. Okay? So this is an irregular verb. The verb write is irregular, and the past tense of the verb write is wrote. She wrote the report. All right? So sometimes that's the mistake. Let's look at a negative sentence. They didn't called. What mistake does the student make here? Remember the rule? Whenever we have a negative sentence, we come back to using what? The base form of the verb. But this student forgot. So it should be, they didn't call. Right? Good. Next, did you had lunch? Again, what happened? The student forgot that you come back to the base form of the verb. So it should be, even with the question, did you have lunch? Let's say these again. She wrote the report. They didn't call. Did you have lunch? Okay, good. Sometimes the mistake is in spelling. For example, this person wrote, he stopped smoking. So here, what did we need to do? Do you remember when we learned about the spelling? This should be, he stopped smoking, okay? Because we had consonant, vowel, consonant for stop, and then we need to double the last letter and add ed, all right? Good. And sometimes the mistake is that the helping verb did is forgotten. For example, these are questions. You wake up early? Now, if someone said that, would the other person understand? Probably they would understand. Is it correct English? No, it's not. So let's fix it. What do we need to do? We need to add which word? What's the helping verb that we use? Did. Where do we put it? Here. So we would say, did you? Okay? Did you wake up early? Here. He speak to his boss? That's wrong. So how do we correct it? Again, the helping verb has been forgotten. So we say, did he speak to his boss? All right? So these are some of the common mistakes that people make using the past simple tense. So be careful of your tense, your verb form, your spelling, and make sure to use that helping verb. Just to review, you know that you have learned the past simple tense properly and well when you can do 3 things, right? Make a positive sentence, a negative sentence, and a question. Easily and quickly, and switch back and forth without any uncertainty. Okay, when you can do it correctly and quickly and confidently. Let's look at some examples with the regular verbs. She called. She didn't call. Did she call? Right? These kind of sentences should come to you easily now. All right? The more you practice, they will. Or with an irregular verb. For example, they paid. Negative. They didn't pay. Question, did they pay? All right. So these were my examples. These were a few examples, but you have examples all around you, all through your life, all through your day. So one of the best things you can do, and an easy thing you can do to improve your command of this and your understanding of this past simple tense is to write. Write like a little diary at the end of each day. Write the things that you did. What did you do during the day? Where did you go? What did you do? And this way you will discover what you can say and where you have difficulties. And what you will also know is you'll be reviewing your vocabulary, your grammar, everything all at once. First, write about yourself. Later, when you can do that and write about your regular routine already, write about other things. Write about things other people are doing. Write about what's happening at work. Write about your favorite movie. Write about something that's happening in the news. Okay? But basically, for all of those purposes, you can use the past simple tense. All right? Now, remember, this is part of a series of classes that we have, and the next class you can go to after the past simple tense is the past continuous tense. So make sure to move forward into the fullness of all of these tenses. So eventually you can express yourself very well and effectively in English. And if you'd like a little more practice on the past simple tense, then go to Engvid where you can do a quiz. Thanks very much for watching, and I wish you all the best with your English tenses. Bye for now.